But with this bad look comes the fallout. I want to ask you what you think is the best case and the worst case scenario for this fallout. We've already kind of talked about the lower league clubs and how that would affect them. But I kind of want to know if you see anything else coming.
I mean, I think best case scenario, it's a wake up call for USSF, and they make great improvements to the US Open Cup. They improve the production, they improve the facilities, and I believe in the article, MLS said they would reconsider in the next following year. Best case scenario, they come right back and we get an increased, level to the competition from all perspectives, from every league and participant in there. I think honestly, I don't see a situation where MLS is really getting hurt that much here. I think people will be upset, but I think inevitably I feel like people will end up getting over it at some point, whether that's right or wrong. I just do. I think people will, the season will start, things will happen, and people will turn their focus onto other things, the regular season, the league's cup, the playoffs. I guess worst case scenario is that they never go back to the US Open Cup and the cup folds. That's probably the worst case scenario. I don't know how much of a reality that is, but I would definitely see that as the worst case scenario. But I don't see MLS I don't think MLS will go into turmoil because they dropped out of the US Open Cup.
Do have a bit of a disagreement with that. It kind of goes back to the roster rules thing that we were talking about, where MLS Twitter, US men's national team Twitter, anti MLS Twitter, it's not really the fan base that they're desiring to capture, right? The family of five with two of their buddies who are looking for something to do on their off weekend of club play, who don't know anything about the cup, is probably what their target is. So when you mention that they're not going to get hurt, I think the majority of it is relatively true. Again, they don't make this decision if they send out a company to say, hey, what would happen if MLS, pulled out, and 99 of 100 people said that they're going to never go to an MLS game again. They don't make that decision because the numbers aren't in their favor. What I will say is that MLS is hurting their own fan base, however small it may be on Twitter, where I'm seeing people cancel MLS season pass. There are supporters groups who are calling for the boycott of Leagues Cup matches. People are saying that they're not even going to go to MLS games. People who had canceled season tickets. I mean, again, MLS Twitter doesn't make up the average MLS fan. It's probably about 10% of what you'll see. But that being said, if the difference between making a non-existent financial change to your roster rule is a few million gam tam and it's too much to make without risking something, 10% of a league right now can really hit home. It can really, really dig deep, I guess, for lack of a better term. And the problem is that the people who aren't going are your most loyal supporters. If those guys leave, and gals, you're left with the show up for one game a year, 2 games a year crowd. Your ticket sales are going to drop. Your merch sales are going to drop. People are going to go onto Twitter. And if somebody asks, I get questions, posted in chats and all the time, looking to go to my first game, like, where do I sit? Where should I park? What should I look forward to do? If you've got a whole thing saying don't go, it's not worth it, maybe he doesn't go, right? And that changes a lot year over year. You're going to feel this in all areas for a long time. There's a tweet that was put out, and I really didn't like it, that the idea of the cup and not the cup itself was what was drawing all the outrage. And you mentioned it, where the connection really isn't there for the average MLS fan, and I don't disagree with you. But everybody's looking at this from an MLS only point of view when they're making these tweets and when they're making these comments. People being mad at things changing are probably never, they've never sat through a stream that's, second division versus third division on a stream that's got a bar down the middle and it freezes every time it goes over so it can transfer. They haven't sat through that. They probably haven't been to an Open Cup game where you had to go to, Montclair State and sit in a crowd of 3,000 people to support Red Bull versus DC. They probably didn't care about it at all, as you've mentioned before. But this isn't about MLS. It's so much deeper than MLS. It's not an MLS sanctioned cup. It's the country's cup. It's about bringing the game up along all levels, not just the top. And I know you asked about the incentive, but I think it is doing, as much as it's not hurting the average MLS fan, the PR hit and the amount of, your average MLS fan goes on Twitter for the most part. They go on Facebook. If this PR hit trickles out of your diehards and gets into the casuals and they're saying, oh man, everybody's really upset, I should look into this, and they realize they just turned their back on 100 years worth of history, it's not a good look and it's not a good outlook, in my opinion. But that's just
I'm gonna disagree with your disagreement
okay.
because I think the average MLS fan knows very little about the US Open Cup. I think they go to games because they have a good time and it's enjoyment, it's entertainment. That's at the end of the day, like that's what sports is. It's an entertainment industry. It's to go there for people to have a good time, be with friends. I don't think I don't think hardcore fans getting upset about them leaving the US Open Cup is going to drastically drop attendances at games. I think there's probably been a lot of like very instant reactions when this came out, and I would be very curious to see what people think once we get to like the start of the season again. Like if they're still on that like that belief that, I'm not going to support the league until they, make a difference in this decision or reverse this decision, have a change of heart on this. I would be very curious to see, how much of that sentiment still is in place by the time we get to the start of the season, because that's 2 months from now. A lot of things can change in between that time. I'm sure there's going to be some people that still are very like adamant people, and they will truly like go along with, hey, I'm not subscribing to Apple, I'm not going to any games, like I won't support this until you reverse this decision. I just don't think the average fan is going to be affected by that this much. I don't think there's going to be too much of a trickle from the diehards into the casual fans. I mean, could I see a scenario where, attendances definitely dip, especially like a little bit at the start of the season? I could see that. But I just don't think it's a situation where like you're going to have thousands of people less per game in the season because they dropped out of US Open Cup. Like if you're the casual Messi fan that just came over and followed Messi, they don't know anything about the US Open Cup. They probably, I mean, at this point, considering MLS isn't even in the competition anymore, they're never probably going to know about US Open Cup. Um, so I don't think many people are going to be impacted by it too much. And, maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong way. I'm definitely open to, I know you have an opposing opinion on it. So, I'd definitely like to hear what you say on it, but maybe it's being pessimistic. I just don't think that people are going to care too much about it once like the start of the season comes around. The diehards, like you're a diehard fan, like you are not the casual fan of MLS. You know way too much, especially about Red Bull. Way too much about Red Bull. Um, and I just don't think like the casual Red Bull fan would just like completely, abandon the team and merchandise and games because of this decision.
I'm just trying to scroll through Twitter here. I think it's been 2 days since the announcement's been made, and I think you are seeing those, you know, oh, this might not actually be the worst thing in the world for the advancement of MLS. And, those people are starting to creep out. They're still being met with relative pushback as is understandable. Um, it comes down to, in my opinion, individual league success versus history and which one desires more. there's an argument to be made, I do believe, for that tweet that I mentioned before, where people are mad that the idea of the cup isn't happening with MLS teams and not the cup itself. Because as you mentioned, and we've gone through it, right? Not a ton of people showed up, not a ton of people watched on TV because it really wasn't on TV. There is so much that goes into this that we don't have time to talk about it in terms of the marketing, the people in charge of the marketing, the people who are trying to get it into another level, why Apple doesn't have control over it, and does that have a? There's so much that goes into it, and some of it's kind of tinfoil hat conspiracies, but some of it makes some sense. We won't go into it today.